Does this sound familiar? You're staring at your phone. You just sent another message. You're waiting. You see those little bubbles appear. They disappear. They appear again. And then nothing. No reply. Not yet. So you wait a little longer. You check again. Nothing. And that silence? It starts to eat you alive from the inside. You're not crazy for feeling this way, but you might be doing one thing that's keeping you stuck. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what it is. Here's what nobody talks about. There are people in this world who feel something deeply, who love with everything they have, who give their whole heart to one person and hope that person catches it. These people, maybe that's you, they show up with intensity, with presence, with care. They call when they say they'll call. They text when they think about someone. They don't play games. They don't hide. They just love out loud. And then there's the other side. The people who pull away when things get real, who disappear right when you need them most, who seem interested one day and completely gone the next. You call them avoidant. They call themselves independent. But you know what you feel? You feel like you're screaming into a void, like your love is hitting a wall and bouncing right back at you. You've tried everything. You gave them space. You backed off. You played it cool. You tried not to care so much. You told yourself maybe they're just not that into you. Maybe you should move on. But every time you try to let go, something keeps pulling you back. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's the way they looked at you that one time. Maybe it's the future you keep imagining in your head. And you keep asking yourself one question. Why can't I stop thinking about someone who barely thinks about me? Here's the truth nobody has told you. They are thinking about you. More than you know. They're just thinking about you in a way that scares them. Because what you feel for them, that depth, that intensity, that need, it triggers something in them. Something uncomfortable, something they learned very young to avoid. And this is where most people fail. They either push harder, send more texts, call more often, try to prove how much they care, or they go the other way. They disappear completely. They act like they don't care. They play games they learned from some online article. Both approaches feel wrong, and both approaches push avoidant people further away. But what if I told you there is a third way? A way to reach someone who everyone says is impossible to reach? What if I told you that the texts you're about to learn change everything? Not because you're manipulating them, but because you're finally speaking a language they understand. A language built on respect, on space, on depth, on letting them be exactly who they are without asking them to be someone else. Most people will tell you to give up on avoidant people. That they're not worth it, that you deserve someone who meets you halfway. But I'm not most people, and I don't think you should give up either. Not because you're desperate, not because you have low standards, but because you have the capacity to love deeply. And deep love is rare, and people who can love deeply deserve to find someone who can receive that love, even if that someone took some time to realize what they had in front of them. So here's what I need you to do. Keep watching until the very end, because I'm about to give you 3 text messages. These aren't random texts. These are strategic messages built on real psychology. And when you use them the right way, something shifts. The person who was running from you starts to slow down, starts to look back, starts to wonder why you suddenly feel different. And once they start wondering about you, they never stop. This is going to be the most important 8 minutes of your week. So do yourself a favor. Do not skip ahead. Do not watch the end first, because everything I'm about to teach you builds on itself. And if you jump ahead, you'll miss the mindset shifts that make these texts actually work. You deserve to be understood. You deserve someone who sees you. And by the time this video is over, you're going to have tools that change how you show up in every relationship going forward. Now let me ask you one more question before we dive in. Are you ready to stop chasing and start leading? Because that's what this is about. Becoming someone who leads with confidence. Someone who understands human behavior. Someone who doesn't beg for love, but creates it naturally. If that sounds like the version of yourself you've been trying to become, let's begin. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt completely seen by the person you loved? Not questioned, not analyzed, not judged, just seen. If you're like most people watching this video, that feeling feels like a distant memory. Maybe it never existed in the first place. What you're feeling right now is real. It's heavy. And you need to know that you're not weak for feeling it. You are exhausted. I want you to sit with that for a second. You are genuinely exhausted. Not because you did something wrong, but because you've been pouring from an empty cup for so long that you forgot what it felt like to be full. Every single day, you wake up and check your phone. You look for their name. You wait for a message that might not come. And even when it does come, you hold your breath. Because you're never sure if this is the message that pulls you back in or pushes you further away. This is the reality no one talks about. The emotional weight of loving someone who doesn't meet you halfway. You wake up thinking about them before your eyes even open. You go to sleep hoping they'll text you one more time before the day ends. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze every word they said. You try to figure out what you could have done differently, what you should have said, what you shouldn't have sent. And the worst part? You're doing all of this alone. Nobody around you understands. Your friends tell you to move on. Your family tells you to let go. But nobody feels what you feel in that moment when your phone lights up with their name. Nobody knows what it costs you to keep showing up when they barely show up at all. Here's what makes this even harder. You start doubting yourself. You start questioning your own worth. You ask yourself things like, am I too much? Am I asking for too much? Is something wrong with me for wanting consistency? For wanting someone who texts back? For wanting someone who makes time for you the way you make time for them? And the answers you give yourself are brutal. You tell yourself maybe you are too much. Maybe you should lower your expectations. Maybe you should be grateful for what you have instead of wanting more. You talk yourself out of your own needs. You shrink yourself down to fit into a space that was never big enough for you in the first place. This is where most people break, not because they don't love enough, but because they start believing they don't deserve more. Let me say something that might shake you. You are not asking for too much. You are not difficult. You are not high maintenance. You are a human being who wants to be treated like one. That's not a crime. That's not weakness. That's the most basic human need there is. Connection, presence, consistency. These aren't luxuries. They're essentials. But here's what happens when you don't get those things. You start building walls of your own, not because you want to, but because your heart is trying to protect you from breaking completely. You start responding slower. You act like you don't care. You tell yourself you don't need them. You convince yourself that you're fine alone. And on the outside, people think you're moving on. They think you're strong. They think you've got it together. But on the inside, you're still that person. The one who checks their phone every 5 minutes. The one who rereads old messages, trying to find meaning. The one who writes responses and deletes them. The one who almost sends something but holds back because you're afraid of what happens if you show too much of yourself again. You're stuck. And you're tired of being stuck. You've tried to walk away. You really have. You told yourself this is the last time. You promised yourself you wouldn't text first. You made rules. You set boundaries. But then one message from them comes through and all of that disappears. Because your heart doesn't care about your rules. Your heart just wants them. And that's not shameful. That means you care deeply. It means you love with your whole chest. That's rare in a world where everyone is so scared to be vulnerable. The problem isn't that you love too much. The problem is that you've been giving that love to someone who doesn't know how to hold it yet. But today is the day that changes, because you're about to learn something that shifts everything. You're about to learn how to stop pouring your heart into hands that keep closing. You're about to learn how to speak in a way that actually reaches the person you've been trying to reach for so long. You're about to learn how to stop begging for love and start commanding it naturally. So let me tell you what's really happening inside your head. You're carrying a story a narrative you've built over weeks and months and maybe even years of trying to make this relationship work. And that story sounds something like this. They don't feel what I feel. They're not as invested as I am. They could take me or leave me. I am more into them than they are into me. And that story? It feels true. It feels like the most honest thing you know. But I'm going to challenge that story right now. And I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to say might flip everything you thought you understood about this situation. You've been operating under 3 false beliefs, and each one has been keeping you trapped. The first false belief is this: you think their distance means they don't care. This is the one that hurts the most. The silence feels like rejection. The slow responses feel like disinterest. The times they go completely missing feel like proof that you don't matter to them. And every time you reach out and get nothing back, that belief gets stronger. You start to feel like you're chasing someone who wouldn't notice if you disappeared tomorrow. But here is what you're missing. When an avoidant person pulls away, it doesn't mean they stopped caring. It means they started feeling something. And that feeling terrified them. Let me say that again. Their distance is not a sign of indifference. It's a sign of emotional overwhelm. They're not pulling away because they forgot about you. They're pulling away because you became too important to them, and that importance feels dangerous. So they retreat, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and they don't know what to do with that. The second false belief is even more damaging. You think if you just tried harder, things would change. You keep thinking that there's something you can do. One more grand gesture. One more heartfelt message. One more moment where you prove how much you love them. If you could just find the right words, the right approach, the right strategy, they would finally see how much you care and they would stop pulling away. But that's not how it works. Here's the brutal truth. The harder you push, the further they run. Not because your love is bad, but because your intensity is triggering the exact pattern they're trying to escape. They learned a long time ago that closeness leads to loss. So when someone comes at them with everything they have, their brain sees a warning sign. Not a gift, a warning sign. And the third false belief might be the hardest one to let go of. You think something is wrong with you. You wonder why you can't just be cooler, why you can't just not care as much, why you're the one who's always overthinking, always feeling more, always wanting more. You look at other people who seem to have it together, people who can date casually and not spiral, people who can go days without texting and not panic, and you wonder what's broken inside of you that makes you feel so much more than everyone else. Let me be very clear about something. There is nothing wrong with you. Nothing. You are not defective. You are not too emotional. You are not too intense. You are a person who knows how to love with your whole self. That's not a flaw. That's a gift. The problem isn't your capacity to love. The problem is that you've been trying to share that love with someone who doesn't have the emotional tools to hold it yet. And I know what you're thinking right now. If none of these beliefs are true, then why does this hurt so much? Why does it feel like I'm the only one trying? Why does it feel like I'm fighting for something they don't even want? Because the way they've been showing up has been real. The silence has been real. The inconsistency has been real. You're not imagining the distance. You're not being dramatic. You're not making it bigger than it is. The hurt you're feeling is completely valid. But here's what you couldn't see until today. Their behavior was never about your worth. It was never about whether you're enough. It was always about their fear, their patterns, their wounds. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because you stop taking their distance personally. You stop making their fear about your value. You start seeing the situation for what it actually is. And that clarity, that changes everything. You're about to learn the psychology behind what makes avoidant people tick. Not to manipulate them, not to trick them into loving you, but to finally understand what's really going on inside their head. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the person who was once impossible to reach becomes reachable. Now let me take you inside the mind of someone you've probably been losing sleep over. To understand why avoidant people behave the way they do, you have to go back, way back. to a time when they were small and vulnerable and completely dependent on someone else. Most avoidant people didn't just wake up one day deciding to push people away, they were trained to do it. By circumstances, by experiences, by the people who were supposed to love them the most. Think about it this way. When you were a child, your whole world depended on the adults around you. You needed them for food, for shelter, for safety, for love. And if those adults were inconsistent, if they were there one day and gone the next, if they gave you affection only when you performed a certain way, if they made you feel like your needs were a burden, then you learned something powerful. You learned that depending on people is dangerous. This is where it starts, not in the relationship you're in right now, but years before that. In a childhood where emotional needs went unmet, where love felt conditional, where asking for too much got you hurt. That's when the avoidant pattern gets created. And it stays with them for life unless something or someone helps them break it. Now here's what happens in their adult relationships. When someone shows up with genuine love, when someone offers real emotional connection, when someone says, "I want to be close to you," their brain doesn't celebrate. Their brain sounds an alarm. Because to them, closeness doesn't mean safety. Closeness means potential loss. Intimacy doesn't mean connection. Intimacy means the possibility of getting hurt again. So what do? They retreat. They create distance. They pull back right when things feel too good. Not because they want to hurt you, but because their nervous system is trying to protect them from a pain that happened long ago. This is why no amount of chasing works. Every time you push closer, you're essentially saying, "I want to get even closer." And their brain hears something like, "Danger is coming," so they run. Not because they don't like you, but because part of them is still that scared child trying to survive. Here's another thing most people never understand. Avoidant people are not avoiding connection. They're avoiding vulnerability. There's a massive difference. They want love just as badly as you do. They want someone who stays, who shows up, who doesn't leave. They want that more than anything. But every time they start to open up, something inside them hits the emergency brake. Because opening up feels like handing someone a weapon they could use to destroy you. That's the prison they're living in. And the harder you try to break them out, the more they retreat into it. Now let me tell you what triggers them the most, because once you see this, you'll understand exactly why your old approach wasn't working. There are two things that trigger avoidant people more than anything else. The first one is neediness. And I'm not talking about normal requests for connection. I'm talking about messages that come from a place of desperation. I'm talking about double texts, long paragraphs, requests for reassurance, anything that signals I cannot function without you. When they see that, their brain doesn't think someone loves me. Their brain thinks someone is going to drain me. Someone is going to take more than I can give. Someone is going to make me responsible for their emotional survival. And they can't handle that, not because they're cold, but because they're terrified of being consumed and then abandoned. The second trigger is pressure, when you ask them where this is going, when you bring up labels, when you try to lock them into something before they're ready. Their brain sees a cage. And even if they care about you, even if they genuinely like you, the pressure makes them want to escape. Not from you specifically, but from the feeling of being trapped. So if you've been doing any of those things, stop. Not because you were wrong, but because you were using a language they don't speak. You were approaching them from your attachment style instead of theirs. And that's exactly why nothing was working. But here's the good news. Now that you understand how their brain works, you can change how you show up. You can start speaking a different language, one that doesn't trigger their fear, one that actually makes them feel safe enough to come closer. That's what the 3 texts I'm about to give you are designed to do. They're not about playing games. They're not about manipulation. They're about communicating in a way that reaches the part of them that actually wants connection, the part that's been locked away for years, the part that wants to let someone in but doesn't know how. And when you learn to speak to that part of them, everything changes, because the person who seemed impossible to reach was never impossible. They were just waiting for someone who understood the map.